You might think the Vatican, with its polished marble floors, sacred relics, and centuries-old rituals, is a place untouchable by scandal. But history whispers secrets that would make even the boldest tabloid blush. Welcome to our channel, where we uncover the hidden, often steamy stories of sexual practices across history. Today we dive into one of the most shocking figures ever to sit on the papal throne, a man whose name alone could ignite rumors and legends across the cobblestone streets of Renaissance Rome, Pope Alexander VI. Yes, the infamous Borgia Pope, the man who made corruption an art form and scandal his constant companion. But beyond the political intrigue, beyond the blood-soaked intrigues and territorial wars, there is a layer of his life rarely explored, a layer where power, passion, and desire intertwine in ways that are both fascinating and horrifying. Born Rodrigo de Borja in 1431, in the sleepy town of Játiva, in what is now Spain, he was far from predestined for the papacy. His early life, however, hinted at the ambitions that would later explode into legend. His family, though noble, was not wealthy, yet Rodrigo had an insatiable hunger for advancement. Some say it was his charm that carried him, a smooth, persuasive charisma that could sway even the most skeptical cardinals. Others whisper that he was already practicing the darker arts of manipulation, flattery, deceit, seduction, long before he ever donned the cardinal's robes. By his 20s, he had secured his first high-ranking position in the church, a role that placed him squarely in the corridors of power. But Rodrigo was not content with mere influence. He craved everything: authority, wealth, and the intoxicating rush of absolute control. By the time he ascended to the papacy in 1492, Rodrigo de Borja had fully transformed into Pope Alexander VI. And with that transformation came a reputation that would forever stain his name. Rome at that time was a city alive with excess, indulgence, and an appetite for spectacle. The Renaissance had blossomed into full swing, bringing with it art, culture, and yes, a fervent appetite for decadence. Alexander's reign was a masterclass in moral ambiguity. Some stories suggest he hosted lavish parties where courtiers, cardinals, and even visiting dignitaries found themselves embroiled in erotic entertainments of all kinds. The Vatican, under his direction, became less a sanctuary and more a palace of delights, a place where the boundaries of propriety were stretched, twisted, and sometimes completely shattered. And it was not just the alleged parties that scandalized Rome. Alexander VI was infamous for his familial favoritism, openly elevating his children to positions of power. Now remember, this was a pope, the spiritual leader of millions, and yet his mistress Vannozza Catani bore him 4 children: Cesare, Giovanni, Lucrezia, and Jofré. The Borgia offspring were notorious in their own right. Cesare, a military genius and alleged assassin; Lucrezia, whose beauty was matched only by the whispers of intrigue surrounding her love affairs and political marriages. But the rumors go further. Some contemporaries claimed that Alexander's indulgence in his family extended into shocking private behaviors, with secret chambers and gardens rumored to host clandestine encounters. Scholars argue over the truth of these claims, but one thing is clear: the man blurred lines in ways that have made historians both fascinated and horrified for centuries. And let us not ignore the darker legends, the stories that almost certainly veer into myth, yet are too delicious to ignore. One popular tale tells of a hidden chamber beneath the Vatican, a room furnished with mirrors and silk cushions, where Alexander supposedly engaged in erotic games with courtiers and nobles who dared to please him. Some accounts claim that he used exotic perfumes and rare aphrodisiacs, substances that, according to rumor, could heighten desire to almost supernatural levels. Perhaps these stories were exaggerated, the imagination of enemies seeking to tarnish a man already despised for his blatant nepotism and political ruthlessness. Or perhaps, in the shadowed corners of Renaissance Rome, the line between truth and fantasy was so thin that both might be true. What is certain is that Alexander's reign invites questions that challenge our understanding of power and morality. It wasn't only whispers in the corridors that defined Alexander's scandalous reputation. His political maneuvers were laced with a ruthlessness that had a moral edge as sharp as a dagger. Cesare Borgia, his eldest son, became the embodiment of this philosophy, a man whose charm was matched only by his capacity for cruelty. Under Alexander's guidance, Cesare's rise was meteoric, and the stories of his exploits often blur the line between legend and documented history. He is said to have poisoned rivals, orchestrated assassinations, and seduced influential women, sometimes in the name of securing alliances, sometimes merely to assert power. Pope Alexander's complicity in these acts only fueled the perception of him as a man who saw the papacy as a throne of worldly indulgence rather than spiritual stewardship. The combination of familial promotion, political cunning, and indulgent personal habits made him the ultimate anti-hero of Renaissance Rome. And then there are the more bizarre tales, those that historians are hesitant to repeat. Yet the allure of the scandal is irresistible. Some sources allege that Alexander VI had a fascination with astrology and occult rituals, claiming that certain ceremonies could amplify sexual desire or bind rivals to his will. One story, perhaps more rumor than fact, suggests he once commissioned a set of paintings depicting mythological scenes of sensuality so vivid that the artists were reportedly afraid of the Pope's reaction. These paintings, some claim, were intended to educate his children in the pleasures and politics of power, a mix of eroticism and strategy designed to prepare them for the ruthless world of the Borgia dynasty. Whether these tales are true, or the inventions of gossip-hungry chroniclers, they contribute to a portrait of Alexander VI as a man who treated life, power, and desire as inseparable threads in a single, intoxicating tapestry. Yet Alexander VI's scandal was not merely personal or familial, it was also deeply institutional. The papacy, which traditionally stood as a moral and spiritual guide, became under his reign a stage for political theater and human indulgence. His interactions with other European powers were often framed by sexual intrigue, bribery, and manipulation, leading to alliances sealed not only with treaties but with whispered promises and rumored liaisons. The line between diplomacy and debauchery became increasingly blurred. Cardinals, ambassadors, and even monarchs found themselves navigating a court where morality was flexible and where rumor could be as dangerous as an army. In this environment, Alexander thrived, orchestrating power plays with the same ease that he allegedly orchestrated private pleasures. Some stories suggest that Alexander VI even used his own sexuality as a tool of influence, a claim both shocking and difficult to verify. Contemporary accounts are tantalizingly vague, hinting at encounters with courtiers and visitors that went far beyond casual conversation. These narratives often paint the Pope as a man for whom desire was intertwined with authority, where seduction became another instrument of control. Whether these accounts were exaggerated, misinterpreted, or entirely fabricated, they reveal the fascination and fear that Alexander inspired among his contemporaries. He was a man whose very presence seemed to bend the rules of propriety, a pope for whom the sacred and the profane were never entirely separate. And yet, for all his scandal, Alexander VI was a master strategist, a pope whose cunning shaped the future of Italy and left a legacy that endures in both awe and revulsion. He navigated treacherous waters, outmaneuvered rivals, and expanded the influence of the Church, all while weaving a personal narrative that was as intoxicating as it was infamous. In many ways, his genius lay not only in political acumen but in his ability to turn rumor, legend, and desire into instruments of power. The Borgia name became synonymous with excess, cunning, and erotic intrigue, a reputation cemented in the annals of history and myth alike. By the end of Alexander's reign, the city of Rome had been irrevocably changed. The Vatican, already a symbol of spiritual authority, now also bore the mark of human passion, ambition, and scandal. The stories that survive, some documented, some embellished, some entirely fabricated, invite us to reconsider what we think we know about power, morality, and desire. Alexander VI reminds us that history is rarely black and white. It is a tapestry of light and shadow, fact and fiction, where the most shocking truths often emerge from the interplay of rumor, legend, and the undeniable pulse of human desire. His story challenges us, fascinates us, and continues to provoke curiosity centuries after his death, leaving us to wonder just how much of what we believe is history and how much is myth. And as we reflect on his life, it's impossible not to consider the legacy of indulgence he left behind, a legacy that intertwines politics, sexuality, and the human obsession with power in ways that are both instructive and unsettling. What drove Alexander VI to such extremes? Was it mere lust for power, a deep-seated appetite for pleasure, or a combination of both? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between the rumors and the records, in that shadowy space where human ambition meets human desire. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is why the story of the most scandalous pope in history continues to captivate us today, urging us to look beyond the sanctity of the papal office and into the darker, wilder heart of Renaissance Rome itself. Once Alexander VI secured the papal throne, it wasn't just the Vatican that felt the ripple of his influence. His children became instruments, shields, and weapons of his ambition, each one carefully molded to extend the reach of the Borgia name. It is easy to forget, looking back, that these were not merely offspring of a pope, but heirs to a dynasty whose reputation for cunning, seduction, and cruelty would become legendary. Cesare, Lucrezia, Giovanni, and Jofré were not raised in the quiet piety one might expect of a pope's children. They were raised in a world where intrigue was education, where alliances were forged in whispers as often as entreaties, and where the boundaries between love, lust, and political expediency were almost meaningless. By the time they reached adulthood, each of them had absorbed a set of lessons that would shock, thrill, and horrify their contemporaries, and continue to do the same centuries later. Cesare Borgia, the eldest, is perhaps the most infamous. A man of striking presence, brilliant mind, and ruthless ambition, he was both a general and a seducer. From a young age, rumors swirled about his dalliances with powerful women, often those connected to the very men he would later manipulate or destroy. Some accounts suggest he used charm as skillfully as he used his sword, seducing his way into alliances and betrayals with equal finesse. But the darker stories are the ones that linger in memory. Whispers of secret trysts with married women, whose husbands conveniently disappeared. Whispers of poisons slipped into wine and meals to remove obstacles to power. Whispers that Cesare's cruelty extended even to those he claimed to love. One particularly shocking tale, almost certainly exaggerated but widely believed in Rome, alleges that Cesare once hosted a masquerade where men and women were invited under the guise of a formal ball, only for certain guests to vanish mysteriously afterward, their fates left to rumor and fear. Alexander II's approval, or at least indulgence, of his son's actions only deepened the perception that in the Borgia household, morality was optional and ambition mandatory. Lucrezia Borgia, on the other hand, is often remembered as a beauty of mythic proportions, a woman whose charm and grace could disarm even the most suspicious of courtiers. Her marriages were tools of political strategy, arranged to cement alliances that her father and brother could exploit. Yet the legends surrounding her personal life have long eclipsed her political significance. Some contemporaries painted her as a poisoner extraordinaire, a woman whose delicate smile concealed a lethal knowledge of toxins, allegedly learned under the tutelage of her father or brother. Other stories hint at her participation in highly secretive erotic gatherings, where the boundaries of pleasure and power blurred into dangerous games. One enduring myth claims that Lucrezia had a private collection of lovers, men and women alike, whose identities were so secret that even the most powerful families of Italy feared crossing her. The truth may never be fully known, but the persistence of these tales speaks to the aura of danger, desire, and enigma that surrounded her. Her sexuality, intertwined with the machinations of the Borgia dynasty, became a tool of influence as potent as her father's diplomacy or her brother's military genius. Giovanni Borgia, the Duke of Gandia, presents yet another layer of scandal. Unlike Cesare's calculated cruelty or Lucrezia's seductive mystique, Giovanni's reputation leaned toward the violent and unpredictable. Stories suggest that he carried out his father's orders with a merciless efficiency, often using intimidation and fear to consolidate power. But there are darker whispers, tales of his private indulgences that hint at a man capable of shocking depravity. Some chroniclers of the time claim Giovanni was prone to secretive orgies attended by Rome's elite, gatherings where political enemies and allies alike were equally vulnerable to manipulation, temptation, or elimination. There are even accounts, never fully verified, of Giovanni orchestrating encounters designed to humiliate rivals, blending eroticism with political theater in ways that would make even the most audacious courtiers wary. His eventual mysterious assassination, still debated by historians, was as much a scandal as his life, with rumors suggesting betrayal, revenge, or divine punishment for sins both political and carnal. Jofré Borgia, the youngest, often fades into the background of this infamous family. But his story is no less intriguing. He was said to possess a charm that could disarm suspicion and a cunning that belied his years. Legends suggest he participated in the family's infamous gatherings, learning from his older siblings the complex interplay of sex, power, and manipulation. There are even rumors, particularly in the more salacious chronicles of the time, that Jofré's relationships were deliberately provocative, intended to scandalize rivals, and assert the Borgia presence in Rome and beyond. Some writers of the period went so far as to claim that he was involved in erotic games that included the manipulation of both sexes in complex political gambits, a blend of sexuality and strategy that has fascinated historians for centuries. Though less notorious than his siblings, Jofré's life reinforces the sense that in the Borgia household, the line between private desire and public ambition was all but non-existent. The family's scandals were compounded by Alexander VI's own indulgences, which many believed created an environment where secrecy and desire could flourish unchecked. The Vatican, traditionally a space of spiritual reflection, was transformed under his reign into a theater of excess. It is said that the Pope himself had a taste for elaborate spectacles, some of which blurred the lines between ritual, entertainment, and eroticism. Rumors speak of private gardens, hidden chambers, and corridors where only the initiated dared to tread, and where the boundaries of morality were constantly tested. Some chroniclers suggest that the children were encouraged, or at least not prevented, from participating in these spectacles, learning firsthand the complex interplay between pleasure, power, and influence. The truth may be unknowable, but the legends persist, offering a tantalizing glimpse into a world where the sacred and the profane coexisted in uneasy intimacy. And then there are the stories that have become almost fantastical over time, tales so outrageous that they straddle the line between history and myth. One such tale describes a secret nocturnal ritual in which the Borgia children, under their father's watchful eye, would gather with courtiers and nobles for games designed to test loyalty, courage, and desire. Participants were said to be subjected to a series of trials that combined elements of seduction, strategic manipulation, and sometimes outright humiliation. While these accounts are likely exaggerated, if not entirely invented, they reflect the contemporary perception of the Borgias as a family, for whom scandal was a tool, a weapon, and a form of education. These stories also highlight the way in which sexuality and power were intertwined in Renaissance Rome, particularly under a pope whose own morality was the subject of endless gossip and speculation. Perhaps most intriguing are the rumors surrounding Lucrezia's own agency. While she has often been portrayed as a passive pawn of her father and brother, some historians suggest she wielded her own form of influence, using her beauty, intelligence, and charm to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. It is said that she could turn potential enemies into allies with a word, a glance, or a carefully placed act of seduction. Some accounts even suggest that she may have had secret lovers whose identities were carefully guarded, men and women whose allegiance she could command through both affection and fear. These stories, whether entirely true or not, contribute to the enduring fascination with Lucrezia Borgia, as a woman who managed to maintain both power and mystique in a world dominated by men, scandal, and the constant threat of violence. Cesare's later exploits particularly cemented the family's legendary status. After leaving the clergy, he became a military leader, carving out territories and establishing a reputation as both brilliant and ruthless. The tales of his exploits are as much about sexual conquest as they are about military strategy. Some chroniclers claim he would use seduction to weaken political opponents, employing charm, threat, and rumor in equal measure. Others suggest that the erotic elements of his life were almost ritualized, a series of strategic moves designed to cement alliances, intimidate enemies, and maintain the aura of the Borgia dynasty. Whatever the truth, Cesare's life demonstrates how deeply the family's reputation for scandal, cunning, and sexual intrigue was woven into the very fabric of Renaissance Italy. Even centuries later, the stories of Alexander VI and his children continue to fascinate, blur, and provoke. What is myth? What is fact? How much was the invention of jealous rivals, and how much reflected real behavior? The enduring allure of the Borgia family lies in this uncertainty. Their lives were a complex web of politics, desire, and ambition, where sexuality was as much a tool as a sword, and scandal was as essential as strategy. Alexander VI may have set the stage, but it was his children who embodied and perpetuated the legacy, each one a vivid character in a story that continues to enthrall, shock, and intrigue historians, writers, and curious minds alike. And as we consider the Borgia children, it becomes clear that the scandal surrounding Pope Alexander VI was not a simple matter of one man's indulgence. It was a family enterprise, a dynasty that leveraged sex, power, and myth to extend influence across Italy and beyond. The combination of their personal beauty, strategic cunning, and willingness to embrace, or at least tolerate, the risque and forbidden has left a mark that still captivates the imagination. From Cesare's lethal charm, to Lucrezia's enigmatic allure, from Giovanni's violent exploits to Jofré's provocative intrigues, the children of Alexander VI were instruments of both legend and terror, each one a living embodiment of the scandalous, seductive world their father helped create. Rome was never a city short on intrigue, but under Alexander VI, the Vatican transformed into something wholly unprecedented, a stage for both divine authority and human indulgence. Behind the polished marble, gilded altars, and echoing halls of prayer, there were whispers of hidden passages, secret gardens, and chambers where the boundaries between sanctity and sin blurred in ways that would scandalize even the most cynical historian. While the papal throne had always been a seat of power, Alexander's reign turned it into a theater of excess where politics, pleasure, and rumor became inseparable, creating an environment that drew both awe and horror in equal measure. Visitors to the Vatican at the time often marveled at its grandeur, but a select few spoke of places forbidden to the public. Some chroniclers claimed there were underground corridors, winding labyrinths lined with tapestries and mirrors, where only the Pope and his closest confidants, or the most daring courtiers, would venture. These corridors allegedly led to private chambers designed for both entertainment and clandestine meetings, spaces where secret alliances were formed, and, according to legend, where pleasure was not merely tolerated, but orchestrated as an instrument of power. Some say these rooms were lavishly decorated, with cushions of velvet, incense of rare fragrance, and artworks depicting scenes of erotic mythology, intended not only for delight, but to serve as instruction in the art of seduction, strategy, and influence. Among the most enduring stories is that Alexander VI hosted nightly gatherings of Rome's elite, masked affairs, where anonymity encouraged indulgence and secrecy. These so-called midnight councils were rumored to combine political negotiation with debauched entertainment. Some accounts describe guests participating in elaborate games, tests of loyalty, or sensual trials, while others suggest the Pope himself acted as both host and orchestrator, ensuring that desire and manipulation were inseparably intertwined. Whether true or embellished, these tales contributed to the growing legend of Alexander as a pope who treated both the sacred and the profane as tools to extend his dominion. And then there were the gardens, hidden retreats within the Vatican, reportedly accessible only through secret entrances known to the Pope and a select few. Chroniclers whisper of exotic plants, fountains, and sculptures designed to stimulate the senses, a deliberate blending of nature, art, and eroticism. Some tales suggest that Alexander would use these gardens as private meeting places for his children, courtiers, and lovers. orchestrating encounters that combined seduction, negotiation, and political theater. These rumors, of course, might have been exaggerations designed to smear a pope already notorious for nepotism and moral flexibility. Yet the persistence of the stories speaks to the climate of intrigue and indulgence that permeated the Vatican under his rule. Alexander's fascination with the erotic was not merely passive. Some stories suggest he commissioned paintings and sculptures depicting mythological orgies, Bacchic revelries, and scenes of romantic conquest, intended to entertain, educate, and perhaps even intimidate those who entered his private quarters. Artists, aware of the Pope's reputation and capricious temperament, reportedly worked in secrecy, producing works so vivid that some courtiers feared the consequences of even seeing them. One particularly striking legend claims that Alexander once staged a private viewing of these artworks for visiting dignitaries, framing the exhibition as both a demonstration of taste and a subtle warning. In Rome, under the Borgia's, power and desire were inseparable, and neither should be underestimated. Some rumors even suggest that Alexander's indulgences extended into the more bizarre realms of sexuality. Chroniclers hint at the use of aphrodisiacs and rare oils, substances intended to heighten pleasure and manipulate desire. There are stories of secret encounters where trust, loyalty, and lust were tested simultaneously, creating a dangerous but intoxicating environment for those close to the papal court. While modern historians often view these claims with skepticism, it is impossible to ignore the way they shaped the legend of Alexander VI as a pope who not only tolerated but actively orchestrated indulgence, blending erotic spectacle with political maneuvering. The Pope's personal lifestyle reinforced these rumors. Alexander VI was known for his extravagant tastes, favoring luxurious clothing, jewels, and elaborate ceremonies that sometimes verged on theatrical excess. Some chroniclers even allege that he would host feasts where courtiers and cardinals were encouraged to drink, gamble, and participate in games that tested discretion and morality, blurring the lines between social enjoyment and scandalous indulgence. Guests often left these events with stories that spread throughout Rome, feeding both admiration and fear. It was said that no visitor could remain untouched by the aura of danger and pleasure that surrounded the Borgia court, a sensation that became a defining feature of Alexander's legacy. Among the most sensational stories were those involving the Pope's alleged private relationships. Some contemporaries suggested that Alexander VI was not content merely to witness or orchestrate the pleasures of others. He reportedly engaged directly in acts that would shock modern sensibilities. Legends hint at encounters with both men and women of influence, sometimes carried out in secret chambers or secluded gardens. While historians debate the accuracy of these tales, their persistence over centuries underscores the enduring fascination with the Pope as a man who blurred the sacred and the profane in ways almost unimaginable for a religious leader. The Vatican itself became a reflection of this blending of power and desire. Hidden alcoves and chambers, secret staircases and passages, and meticulously curated gardens all served as both playground and stage, where Alexander could exercise authority, indulge curiosity, and test loyalty. Visitors to Rome were often struck by the contrast between the public sanctity of the church and the private indulgences rumored to take place within its walls. Some chroniclers even claimed that these hidden spaces were designed to teach lessons about influence, seduction, and manipulation, a kind of education in the art of power delivered through pleasure and scandal. The Pope's children, of course, played a role in these settings. Cesare, Lucrezia, Giovanni, and Jofré were said to be active participants in the court's intrigues, using charm, beauty, and cunning to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined life at the Vatican. Cesare, with his deadly charisma, allegedly used the private chambers to impress and intimidate allies and enemies alike, while Lucrezia's presence was said to captivate both men and women, reinforcing her reputation as a figure of both fascination and fear. These stories, whether exaggerated or true, demonstrate the way in which the family's scandalous reputation extended far beyond individual actions, shaping the perception of the Vatican itself as a site of both spiritual authority and human indulgence. Even Alexander's political maneuvers were influenced by the rumors and legends surrounding his court. Some historians suggest that he deliberately cultivated an image of moral flexibility and indulgence to intimidate rivals and manipulate allies, turning gossip and rumor into tools of governance. The Vatican became not just a religious center, but a theater of strategy, where seduction, rumor, and spectacle were as important as diplomacy and military power. Visitors to the papal court had to navigate this intricate social maze, balancing respect, fear, and curiosity in a city where nothing was entirely as it seemed. Perhaps the most enduring stories involve the Pope's alleged nighttime rituals, events said to combine devotion, spectacle, and eroticism in ways that remain almost unimaginable. These tales describe masked gatherings, secret passages, and complex games that tested loyalty, desire, and political acumen simultaneously. Participants, according to legend, were drawn from both the elite of Rome and visiting dignitaries, and no one could predict who would emerge favored or endangered. While modern historians often dismiss these tales as sensationalized rumor, the vividness and persistence of these accounts reveal a powerful truth. Under Alexander II, the Vatican was as much a stage for human desire as a seat of divine authority. The legends surrounding the Vatican under Alexander VI continue to captivate us because they challenge our expectations of history, morality, and power. They suggest a world in which the sacred and the profane were inseparable, where desire and ambition intertwined, and where rumor could shape the fate of nations. Whether entirely true or embellished over centuries, these stories provide a window into the complex, scandalous, and sometimes shocking environment of Renaissance Rome. Alexander VI, through his orchestration of both politics and pleasure, transformed the Vatican into a place where scandal was as much a currency as wealth or influence, leaving a legacy that fascinates and horrifies in equal measure. And as we imagine these hidden chambers, secret gardens, and midnight councils, it becomes clear that the most scandalous pope in history was not merely a man of excess, but an architect of a world where desire, power, and rumor were inseparable. The Vatican itself, under his reign, becomes almost a character in the story, a space where the ambitions of the Borgias were played out in both political maneuvering and human indulgence. From the whispered tales of erotic games to the stories of secret passages and luxurious chambers, the legend of Alexander II's Vatican continues to provoke curiosity, awe, and disbelief, reminding us that history is often stranger and far more seductive than fiction. Power, in the hands of Alexander VI and his children, was never purely political. It was a weapon sharpened by fear, desire, and scandal. Behind the gilded walls of the Vatican and the Borgia palaces, lives were manipulated, alliances forged and shattered, and enemies eliminated with a chilling precision. The Borgias understood that in Renaissance Rome, power was inseparable from intimidation, and that rumor, secrecy, and even sexual scandal could serve as instruments of control. By the time Alexander VI's papacy reached its peak, the city had become a web of whispered threats and dark intrigue, where one misstep could be fatal. Cesare Borgia was at the center of much of this darkness. While he is often remembered for his military genius, the stories of his ruthlessness are equally legendary. Poison was his weapon of choice, or at least that is the enduring rumor. Tales claim that Cesare maintained a collection of toxic substances in the Vatican itself, supposedly learned from alchemists and physicians, which he used to quietly remove rivals. Some accounts are more elaborate. Courtiers would be invited to banquets, only to fall victim to subtle poisons, leaving observers puzzled and terrified. While historians debate how many of these deaths were truly orchestrated by Cesare, the fear they inspired cemented the Borgia reputation. To many, the very mention of the family's name was enough to ensure compliance, loyalty, or silence. The darker stories extend beyond mere assassination. Legends suggest that Cesare would sometimes exploit sexual scandal to eliminate political obstacles. In one enduring tale, he allegedly seduced influential women in the households of powerful enemies, then used these relationships as leverage, threatening exposure to force concessions or destroy reputations. In other versions, these affairs were more than political strategy. They were exercises of power, demonstrations of the ability to dominate and manipulate both love and loyalty. The Borgia court, it seems, was a theater where human desire became as dangerous as the sharpest blade. Giovanni Borgia's death, still a historical mystery, adds another layer to the family's infamous shadow. The Duke of Gandia was found murdered under suspicious circumstances, and the true perpetrators remain unknown. Some contemporaries blamed Cesare, suggesting a deadly sibling rivalry fueled by ambition and jealousy. Others claimed that Alexander VI himself was implicated, orchestrating his son's elimination to prevent potential challenges to authority. Rumors also circulated that the murder was tied to sexual scandals, lovers, rivalries, and hidden affairs that collided in deadly ways. Whatever the truth, Giovanni's demise became part of the legend of the Borgias, a story that mixed politics, family loyalty, and erotic rumor in a tapestry that fascinated and terrified Rome. Lucrezia Borgia, too, was not immune to the darker side of the family's power. While she is often romanticized as a beautiful pawn in her father and brother's schemes, legends suggest she participated more actively than is often acknowledged. Some accounts claim she may have been involved in plots of revenge, using her marriages and relationships to gather intelligence, manipulate rivals, or even, in extreme versions of the story, remove threats through poison or other subtle means. The rumors surrounding Lucrezia's personal life, her alleged lovers, secret gatherings, and whispered scandals blend with political intrigue, creating an image of a woman whose beauty was inseparable from danger. Even if exaggerated, these stories reveal how closely the Borgias linked sex, scandal, and power, turning personal relationships into instruments of control. And it wasn't just assassination or intrigue that fueled their reputation. The Borgias were said to have engaged in sexual excesses that shocked even contemporary Rome. Some chroniclers claimed that Alexander VI and his children hosted orgiastic gatherings, blending politics and pleasure in ways that were calculated as much as indulgent. These events were often framed as private celebrations, yet rumors describe them as arenas for testing loyalty, influence, and discretion. The tales are lurid: masked participants, elaborate costumes, exotic stimulants, and games that combined eroticism with negotiation. Whether entirely true or exaggerated for scandal, they contributed to an image of the Borgia court as a place where human desire was not only tolerated but exploited as a tool of power. The use of rumor as a weapon was another hallmark of the Borgias. Alexander II's enemies were adept at spinning tales of sexual depravity, poisoning, and scandal to undermine the Pope's credibility. Some stories, like the whispered claims that Cesare would dispose of rivals in hidden dungeons after secretive erotic encounters, may have been entirely fabricated, yet they persisted, shaping the public perception of the family. In a city governed by gossip and fear, perception was almost as potent as reality. The Borgias exploited this, creating an aura of danger and desire that extended their influence far beyond what brute force alone could achieve. Some of the more shocking legends involve alleged incest and sexual manipulation within the family itself. Chroniclers of the time, often hostile to the Borgias, suggested that boundaries were deliberately blurred, that seduction and intrigue were employed to bind family loyalty through both fear and desire. While these stories are almost certainly exaggerated, perhaps even entirely fabricated, they demonstrate how the family's enemies perceived them, as a group for whom morality was malleable, for whom scandal was a deliberate strategy. The rumors, persistent and sensational, ensured that the Borgias' reputation would endure long after their deaths. Alexander VI's own behavior reinforced this climate of fear and fascination. He was not merely a distant manipulator. He reportedly participated in some of the very acts that fueled rumor and speculation. Stories hint at secretive sexual liaisons with courtiers and visitors, private gatherings with erotic undertones, and rituals designed to test loyalty or exploit desire. Some chroniclers even claimed he used these encounters to manipulate political alliances, turning the intimate into the strategic. The result was a papal court unlike any other in history, where desire and danger were intertwined, and where no one could be certain who was friend, foe, or pawn. Even the broader political landscape of Italy was shaped by Borgia scandals. Alexander VI used marriages, seductions, and rumored indiscretions to secure alliances, destabilize rival families, and maintain control over key territories. The papacy, traditionally a moral authority, became a hub of strategic seduction, rumor, and occasionally lethal indulgence. Legends of poison, hidden dungeons, and erotic manipulation spread throughout Rome, amplifying both fear and fascination. The Borgias, it seems, understood that power could be exercised not only through armies and diplomacy, but also through the subtler, more intimate forces of desire and rumor. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of these scandals, the Borgias were astonishingly effective. Their enemies feared them, their allies courted them, and their stories, both true and invented, ensured their place in history. The combination of sexual rumor, political cunning, and ruthless ambition created a legacy that is difficult to separate from legend. The Borgias were not merely a family of sinners or seducers. They were architects of a world in which morality, fear, and desire were intertwined in a manner both shocking and mesmerizing. By the end of Alexander VI's papacy, the city of Rome had been transformed. Political intrigue, sexual rumor, and the constant threat of violence were omnipresent. The Borgia children had grown into figures of power and scandal, each one continuing the patterns established by their father. Cesare's military genius and charm, Lucrezia's enigmatic allure, Giovanni's violent reputation, and Jofré's cunning all contributed to a tapestry of influence that blended human desire with strategic brilliance. Even centuries later, these stories captivate because they reveal the darker, more human side of power, the ways in which scandal, sexuality, and ambition can intersect to shape history. And as we reflect on this, it becomes clear that the Borgias' notoriety was not merely the product of myth or imagination. It was a deliberate, sometimes ruthless strategy, a combination of talent, charm, and fear, designed to secure power in a world where alliances were fragile and life was often fleeting. Whether through whispered rumors, calculated seduction, or outright murder, Alexander VI and his children demonstrated that control over others was often exercised as much through scandal and desire as through sword or decree. The story of the Borgias did not end with the death of Alexander VI. In fact, it was only beginning. The rumors, myths, and whispered tales that surrounded his papacy and the lives of his children only grew in the decades and centuries that followed, creating a legend that would outlive the family itself. Artists, writers, and chroniclers seized upon the scandal, exaggerating, embellishing, and mythologizing every detail until the line between fact and fiction became almost impossible to discern. In the collective imagination, the Borgias became symbols of lust, ambition, and ruthless cunning, a family whose very name evoked both fascination and fear. Even the death of Alexander VI did little to diminish the aura of scandal. He passed away in 1503, allegedly from malaria, though some rumors suggested foul play. Whispers claimed that poison was involved, perhaps at the hands of enemies who could no longer tolerate his excesses, or in some more lurid versions, even by members of his own family seeking to consolidate power. The Pope's passing was swift, and Rome seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would become of the dynasty that had dominated the city, as politics and scandals for over a decade. Cesare, Lucrezia, and Jofré all survived him, each continuing the family legacy in their own ways, and each contributing to the enduring mythos of the Borgias. Cesare, freed from his ecclesiastical obligations, became a warlord and politician of remarkable talent, but his reputation for sexual intrigue and ruthlessness only intensified. One enduring story claims that he used seduction as a weapon, luring political opponents into compromising positions before removing them from power entirely. Some chroniclers even suggested that Cesare's relationships were part of a systematic strategy designed to manipulate alliances, gather intelligence, and assert dominance over both men and women of influence. While the truth of these claims remains uncertain, they highlight the way in which the Borgian name had become synonymous with scandal, cunning, and sexualized power. Lucrezia, meanwhile, became an icon of both beauty and mystery. Her life, already entwined with politics and scandal, was endlessly dissected by writers eager to uncover the secrets behind her elegance and charm. Rumors of poison, secret lovers, and clandestine meetings continued to circulate long after her death, solidifying her place in cultural memory as a woman whose allure was inseparable from danger. Some historians argue that she was a victim of circumstance, a pawn in the ambitions of her father and brother. Others suggest she was a more active participant than history often allows, wielding her sexuality and intelligence as tools of influence in a male-dominated world. Regardless, her story remains one of the most compelling in Renaissance history, a mixture of fact, myth, and tantalizing speculation. The cultural impact of the Borgias is equally fascinating. Artists and playwrights seized upon their legend, creating works that dramatized their scandals and elevated them to mythic proportions. Paintings depicted Lucrezia with a mysterious smile, Cesare with a calculating gaze, and Alexander VI as a figure whose indulgence and cunning knew no bounds. Literature, too, embraced the sensational aspects of their story, blending historical events with imagined sexual exploits, poisoning plots, and political intrigue. Even today, novels, films, and television series continue to retell the tale, often emphasizing the lurid over the factual, yet preserving the essential aura of scandal that has made the Borgias immortal in popular imagination. Some of the most enduring myths are those most difficult to verify. Stories of incestuous relationships, secret erotic rituals, and poisoned lovers. While many of these tales were likely exaggerated by rivals seeking to tarnish the family, their persistence speaks to the cultural fascination with transgression and excess. The Vatican, the Borgia palaces, and the streets of Rome become almost characters themselves, settings where power, desire, and rumor intersected in ways both terrifying and intoxicating. Even centuries later, it is this combination of fear, fascination, and myth-making that keeps the Borgia story alive in history, art, and popular imagination. Alexander VI himself became a symbol of the dangers of unchecked ambition and indulgence. While some historians attempt to rehabilitate his reputation, highlighting his administrative skills, strategic acumen, and political innovations, the scandalous tales remain dominant. The Pope, who openly favored his children, hosted elaborate gatherings, and allegedly orchestrated sexual and political manipulation, continues to captivate because he embodies the extremes of human desire and ambition. In studying Alexander VI, we confront the unsettling truth that power can amplify both virtue and vice, and that human appetites, sexual, political, or otherwise, can shape the course of history as profoundly as armies or treaties. The children, too, left legacies that intertwined scandal and accomplishment. Cesare's military campaigns influenced the political landscape of Italy for decades. Lucrezia's marriages and alleged manipulations impacted dynasties beyond Rome, and even Giovanni and Jofré, whose lives ended more tragically, contributed to the aura of danger, intrigue, and desire that surrounded the family. Their stories are reminders that scandal and myth are often inseparable from the historical record, and that the ways in which humans narrate history, through rumor, embellishment, and speculation, can be as influential as the events themselves. It is also striking how the Borgias' notoriety has survived through centuries of reinterpretation. Chroniclers, historians, artists, and filmmakers have all added layers of interpretation, often emphasizing sexual scandal and excess. Even modern retellings, though sometimes romanticized, continue to highlight the sensational aspects: secret chambers, hidden lovers, whispered poisons, and erotic intrigue. These narratives, while occasionally straying from historical accuracy, maintain the essential spirit of the Borgia legend, a story that fascinates because it is at once human, shocking, and mythic. Some of the myths are particularly enduring because they touch upon universal fears and desires. The Borgias, in this sense, function as both historical figures and archetypes: the cunning ruler, the seductive daughter, the ruthless son. They represent extremes of human behavior, a vivid lens through which to explore power, sexuality, and morality. The fact that these stories continue to captivate audiences through history books, novels, films, and documentaries, speaks to their lasting resonance. In the end, the scandal of Alexander VI and his family is more than just lurid gossip. It is a story about ambition, desire, and the human propensity to blur the line between morality and expedience. It is about a family that transformed rumor into power, sexuality into strategy, and scandal into a lasting legacy. The tales of hidden chambers, secret gardens, poisoned rivals, and erotic intrigue, whether entirely true or partially mythologized, offer a window into a world where nothing was entirely sacred, and where human desire could be as influential as political treaties or military campaigns. And so, as we reflect on the most scandalous pope in history and his extraordinary children, we are left with a mixture of awe, horror, and fascination. The Borgias remind us that history is rarely simple or sanitized. It is filled with shadow, rumor, and the complex interplay of human desires. Their story challenges our assumptions, intrigues our imagination, and continues to provoke curiosity centuries after their deaths. What is your takeaway from the lives of Alexander VI and his children? Was it their audacity, their cunning, their rumored sexual exploits, or the way they blurred morality and power into a single intoxicating force? The truth may be forever intertwined with myth, yet that is precisely why the legend endures, captivating historians and storytellers alike. If one fact about the Borgias shocks you more than any other, share it in the comments, because their story, full of intrigue, desire, and rumor, continues to provoke conversation and curiosity today. And if you want to uncover more hidden chapters of sexual and political history, make sure to subscribe, because the world is full of stories that are just as scandalous, mysterious, and fascinating as that of the Borgias.